We are coming to you again. This is a 2 week, or I guess a 2 week update. 2 weeks ago, we had another online meeting to kind of share some insight onto the sheep and goat markets due to the COVID-19 impact. And so this online meeting today, we're going to provide some more information, things that have happened over the next 2 weeks. So thanks for joining us. This will be recorded, so you'll be able to tune in and come back if you missed something, or you can share it with some friends and others. So our agenda today is I'm going to provide a bit of a welcome and a little bit more overview and background and kind of set the stage. And then Dr. David Anderson is going to speak and give us an update on the traditional lamb trade. And then we're going to have Mr. Bill Thompson give us an update on the non-traditional lamb and goat trade. And then we have a special guest today. Dr. Ronald Pope was not able to join. I've normally been his backup, but Mr. Jason Banowski, who's currently the president of the Texas Sheep and Goat Raisers and is very involved in the wool and mohair industry. He's going to provide that update for you all. So without any further ado, I'll jump into my kind of welcome and update here. As I mentioned before, this is a follow-up meeting. So we had our first meeting on April 1st, and it was our first COVID-19 market update. What you're seeing now is just a screenshot from when Dr. Anderson was talking about slaughter lamb prices. If you want to go view that, you can find it on YouTube, and the URL is presented right above that screenshot. So just briefly, the takeaways from that first online meeting is we kind of explained how there's really two different lamb trades in the U.S. There's our traditional market, and at that point in time was starting to show some weaknesses. And our non-traditional market was having a little bit of market fluctuations, but we didn't really see any major trends at the time. We also kind of brought to light that there's two major holidays that are upcoming. Easter is past us now, but it was in front of us during our last event, which is a major season for lamb consumption. And then Ramadan is still coming up, and we'll show that in a slide that I've got here in a bit. We also discussed that lamb sales generally are broken into food service and retail, and more than half of that lamb that's consumed in the U.S. goes into food service. And so on March 20th, Texas had officially shut down restaurants, and so it caused some major market disruptions, and those had occurred other parts of the U.S. already, and so we were already seeing those things happening. And then in the wool market, what was kind of recapped is the industry was really previously impacted by trade issues, and it was slightly down with minimal trading. So I think staying informed is really important during these times, very trying times where we're really uncertain about what's going into the future. And so there's other ways to stay informed other than these meetings. We've been working with the American Sheep Industry Association, and they have a podcast called Sheepcast. So Dr. Anderson provided an update on April 9th. And so if you're interested in listening to those podcasts, the past ones or those that will be in the future, you can go to sheepusa.org, and under their news column, there's a link for podcasts. So go to that podcast link and it'll direct you to it. I think they use SoundCloud as the mechanism that you can listen online, or you can get it in your, not iTunes, but your, whatever your favorite or whatever your smartphone is, if they've got a podcast provider app or such, you should be able to locate that Sheepcast podcast. I also really enjoyed a podcast by Meat and Poultry. Rick Stott with Superior Farms provided that on April 10th. So I'd encourage you to go listen to that as well, providing information about how the meat sector is dealing with these issues that we're dealing with. Also, if you want to be involved, I've seen a lot of communications through the trade associations for the sheep industry is the American Sheep Industry. I apologize for not putting the American Goat Federation up there, or AGF is the trade association for the meat goat industry, as well as other goat industries in the U.S. and state organizations. the logo for Texas Sheep and Goat Raisers is on here. And as I mentioned before, Jason Banowski is on this as well, who's the current chairman. I'm sure if you have questions about that, he can answer. But these trade associations and state associations have really worked hard to get letters put together and things of that such to help people reach out to their legislature and other places. So I'd encourage you to stay in tune with those groups. So I wanted to give a bit of a timeline. I don't know if you're like me, but I've been struggling to kind of keep up with what's all going on and timelines, and you know, sometimes I don't know what day of the week it is, just because, you know, our lives have been kind of turned upside down. So I wanted to show this timeline to kind of get you a reminder of how all these things have kind of transpired. So just before 2020 began, the first reports of COVID-19 started in China. And we had our first confirmed case mid to late January. And the administration put in a travel ban at the end of January, beginning of February. Middle part of February, as we kind of saw these things were really starting to shut down the economy. The stock market took a plunge. Early part of March, there was a House stimulus passed, and I think it was officially signed in to law later part of March. During this time, mid-March, we had a travel ban in Europe. A little bit later, there was the stay-at-home order from our administration. Shortly after that, Mountain States Rosen filed for bankruptcy as we were seeing some major market disruptions and the food service sector really kind of shutting down. Here in Texas, March 20th, restaurants were told to close their doors, which put even more pressure on this. And then mid-April, we had Easter. So we've been through the Easter season of our big lamb retail sales season. And now as we're looking forward, Ramadan will start towards the latter part of May. So just a little bit of a timeline update of where we're at. I'm going to turn it over from here to Dr. David Anderson and let him provide an update on what's going on with the traditional lamb trade. So David, hopefully your mic is unmuted and you're ready to go. I'll advance the slides. Just let me know.
Sounds good. I'm ready. Let's jump right in. Thank you, Reed, and thanks again for inviting me to be part of this today. I sure appreciate it. Let's jump right in. Great. So I am going to talk more traditional side of things and do a little bit of food service stuff, what we're seeing over the last few weeks, and really kind of dig in on several things here. I want to start with one, really a three market average: Colorado, Texas, and South Dakota feeder lambs, and I'm going to use those thinking about lightweight lambs versus heavyweight slaughter lambs. You know, we often talk about those two different terms, but yet we know lots of feeder lambs are going straight to slaughter as our marketing channels have changed. And we certainly see a sharp decline over the last 3 or 4 weeks in terms of lamb prices. As we think of feeder lambs, an average across all of these markets, we see some pretty sharp declines. And again, you know, simply just what we're seeing in the market, really rolling back to the live animals from what's happened on the retail side. As our restaurants closed, particularly all over the country, but particularly that East Coast market right ahead of Easter. And we see the effects of this now that we're past Easter, really rolling backwards from the meat market to our live animal market. And so I thought I'd start with feeder lambs. Reed, go ahead. I think the next one is, Reed in his intro showed one I used, this Sioux Falls marketplace, and see that sharp decline. If we looked at prices last week, we had a little bit of a rebound, but we're still talking about prices that are, disastrously low, quite honestly, for a slaughter weight, heavyweight lambs in that market. And really, if we think about where those are going, they're already at heavyweights. They're ready to go, ready to move. And with all the market uncertainty, restaurant closures, we have processors who have closed also. So we've got that going on. We've got really just a huge slowdown in orders is affecting our live animal prices right away. And I think this is a pretty instructive graph. as I've said before to other groups, when I'm making a chart and I see one that looks like this with this kind of line, I immediately look to see if I got a typo in my data. And unfortunately, it's not a typo. It's what we're seeing actually in the marketplace as the effects of this ripple through the system. Go ahead, Reed. I think we've got a really interesting, from an economist standpoint, phenomenon happening. You look at that sharply lower price on the live animal, and here we have our national lamb cutout value, which is a 5-day rolling average. We continue to see higher prices in terms of the cutout. While we have some prices starting to decline in terms of individual cuts, we don't have a lot of decline in the entire cutout yet, even though we know we've had this, wreckage in the retail sector, particularly the restaurant sector, and in the processing sector and rolling into packing. Anecdotally, I think one of the really interesting things going on is that we're seeing much less lamb being produced. We're seeing falling or much reduced orders for product, yet we don't see prices declining to move that. It's sort of an interesting phenomenon that we're going to move a lot less lamb, but what has been moving has been going at prices not a lot changed. I should point out that when we look at the cutout value, USDA did adjust their cutout calculation starting January 1. So some portion of that cutout above a year ago reflects a revision in how it's calculated. But basically, as we look at this going forward, we got a little bit of lamb moving. What little is moving has been moving to, at some higher prices that aren't really reflecting the lack of lamb movement. We've got, so it's really an interesting, I think, economic phenomenon. One idea, certainly by some in the industry, is that, we do have some lamb being more expensive than, we think of all beef, lamb is more expensive than beef, which is more expensive than pork and chicken. There is some feeling that for some of our consumers are relatively high income, and that those folks may still be in the marketplace buying as retail consumers, that may be allowing us to move some lamb through grocery stores and allowing us to get through this adjustment. One of the things I did not include a chart of this, but I think one of the things we're going to see next week, the USDA's cold storage report comes out, and we'll have the data for March. I think we're going to see a sharp increase in the amount of lamb in cold storage, not only in March, but I think we'll be looking at that into April, May, June as well. As we do move some lambs, sooner or later, we've got lambs that have been produced. We've got live animals. Sooner or later, they're going to have to move through the system. And I think we're going to see an increase in cold storage. Go ahead, Reed. I did want to highlight a couple of things in terms of the number of animals we're processing, but also lamb production. If we look at lamb and yearling slaughter, we had a pretty sharp decline in the last weekly data that we had available. If we look at some of the preliminary estimates of data over the last few days, we continue to see a sharp decline in the number of lambs going to slaughter, well below where we were a year ago. And again, well below a 5-year average. And we do have a decline. We normally see some decline once we get past Easter. Now we're past Easter, but I think we're seeing an even sharper decline really as this roils through the market. Go ahead. Next one should be weights. In the lamb market, we always get concerned about animals being backed up, continuing to be on feed, continuing to grow and put on more weight. I thought I would include this just to show while we've been running below a year ago, some of the data over the last week, the last few days does show an increase in dressed weights. And that's certainly something that would be, it would be pretty great if we could avoid that yet. Just given the way, biology and the lambs are alive and we've got all these backups through the system, certainly an increase in weights is probably something we should expect to see. And what we'll see going forward is that continuing to weigh on the market, just the animals that we've already produced and heavier weights and more effects of that. Go ahead, Reed. You know, we put together slaughter. If we put together slaughter and production, or excuse me, in weights, we get production. Certainly looking at lamb and mutton production, we see a sharp decline as slaughters declined. That decline in slaughter also, you know, even overwhelming the slightly higher weights, and a sharp reduction in lamb and mutton production. Yet we know we've produced the lambs, they just haven't come to market yet. They haven't gone through the system yet. But I do expect that we're still going to see growing cold storage supplies, growing total supplies on our market, even though as we back up through the system, as that continues to go on. Go ahead. I think this is a pretty interesting chart. This comes to us from the Lamb Board, and really looks at the data. You'll see across the bottom, I've got these weeks, March 1, March 8, March 15th, 22nd, 29th, and April 5th. Across the scale, each color, excuse me, corresponds to the red being beef, kind of that orange is chicken, pork, fresh turkey is that dark line, lamb is the yellow line. What this shows is sales growth versus the same week a year ago through retail outlets. And by that, I mean grocery stores. So it is very clear to see as we go from the 1st of March, when we hit the 15th and the 22nd, we're seeing, to tie it to Reed's timeline in his introduction, as we see the rolling effects of restaurant closures around the country, stay-at-home orders, shelter-in-place, whatever we call these things. We know what consumers did. You know, we had restaurants shut down, folks stampeded to grocery stores. And so what this shows is the percentage change in sales growth for lamb, the yellow line, through grocery store outlets. And so as we hit the 15th and the 22nd, those weeks, we saw a 55% increase in lamb sales at grocery stores, at retail. So what that should suggest to us, what we lost at restaurants, we got a bunch of that back in grocery store sales. People did buy our product at grocery stores. Now, more than half of our lamb is sold through restaurants. So did we recapture all of those sales? No, probably not. But I think it clearly shows a couple of things. One's the effect of restaurant shutdowns all over. It shows our ability to recapture some of that and how quickly that was recaptured through the grocery store chains. I think it also shows that a lot of our customers made it to the grocery store. Our consumers got there and bought some product. We certainly did not see the bump that some of the other meats saw, but I think that's really reflective of just how much more reliant we are on restaurants than grocery stores. The 29th, you see a decline. We had a little bit higher sales compared to a year ago, but we get a little rebound in that week leading up to Easter. So one of the things I'd be looking for is we get a little more data of this. Did we capture a lot more of that Easter market in grocery stores? Is certainly something I'll be looking for in this data, and really give us some clues in, how much more of this can we recapture? I don't know about y'all, but that Saturday before Easter, I found some great lamb loin chops, American lamb, at my local grocery store. I bought some of those and threw them on the grill, and they turned out to be pretty fantastic, I thought. And so I was really glad to get those, and certainly glad to see my local store stocking American lamb. And so I'm glad to be part of that next week's data that shows that surge at Easter of grocery store buying. So I'm one of them consumers. So I'm certainly glad to see that, but I think we'll be looking for some of this data going forward. So next slide, Reed, should be my summary slide. What's kind of my take home point? Volatile and lower prices. Certainly ups and downs in the traditional markets, certainly lower prices. Again, you know, what little we have moving in restaurant channels is moving at some prices comparable to a year ago, but I do expect to see rapidly growing supplies of cold storage and continued lower live prices. I'm certainly glad to see this data of increased grocery store sales, that we're making those changes in the food system. Probably not enough to offset restaurant sales, but I'm certain, I think it's certainly positive that we're seeing those changes in the supply chain, that we're getting the product to customers through retail. So with that, I'm going to quit there and turn it over to Reed to take back over, or at least I'll quit yakking and he'll keep controlling the slides. Reed, thank you.
You bet. Thank you. All right. Next up is Bill Thompson. Bill, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead and hit it to the next, advance the slide. Just to differentiate what I'm going to talk about versus what Dr. Anderson just talked about. You know, our non-traditional is just that. It's a little bit different. We typically don't send these animals to feedlots. They are not typically processed in large centralized processors, and the market tends to want a smaller carcass. Here in San Angelo, a slaughter lamb is probably weighing 75 pounds or so, and David just showed you a chart of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 130-pound slaughter lamb. So the markets are just a little bit different. Go ahead. I put this up there I'm a little concerned about what the economy is going to do to our markets, more so than some issues surrounding COVID and specifically the slowdown in processing facilities. And I'm just using this as a little bit of an illustration, but this is the components that make up the beef cutout. And if you look at this, and I'm just going to summarize it real quickly, but the only components that you see in here that are increasing, whereas all the other components of the beef cutout are dropping, round and chuck prices are actually increasing, and that's what we make hamburger out of. And that tells me that maybe people are bracing for a recession. Things get a little bit tight, a little bit lean. We buy less expensive stuff, hamburgers. So that's an indicator to me that maybe the market is becoming maybe a little bit recession defensive, if you will. Another indicator here of my take on the economy as a whole is this weekly economic indicator. The top one is looking back all the way to 2008. You can see we kind of slid into that 2008 recession. Then you look out here towards the end of 2020, and we didn't slide, we just flat fell. And what's interesting about this economic indicator is some of the factors. It takes into account some retail sales, unemployment, some staffing levels, consumer spending, steel production, electric utility output, fuel usage, and just a pretty good snapshot of the things that we can measure that makes the economy move forward. So, and you can see that's taken a hard hit, well below where we were in the 2008-2009 recession. Unemployment. This last week we took another 5.5 million initial applications from people across the country. I'm hearing economists predict maximum unemployment rates of between 20 and 30% possibly. And I think we're at 15% now. So again, I'm a little concerned about consumers' ability to buy the non-traditional lamb with unemployment rates that maybe are approaching those levels. Here we are looking at our slaughter lambs here in San Angelo. If you looked at this, you might think we're in pretty good shape. We're actually well above where we were last year. Last year was a little bit of an anomaly. We had an awful lot of our annual volume showed up a little bit earlier in the year, and it quite honestly overwhelmed our buyers, and the prices suffered. So at least here in San Angelo, we're well above where we were this year. What you're looking at that is a monthly weighted average. We've still got 2 more sales this month to go into that April estimate, but it looks pretty good where we're at so far. Read. Okay. The same table I showed you all last week. Click that once, Reed. The thing I want to point out to everybody is if you look at the volume that we're moving through San Angelo of our slaughter lambs, you can see here things have been building for several years, you know, in the 30, 40, 50,000. Well, then here 17, 18, and 19, we really kicked into high gear as far as producing slaughter lambs from 83,000, 90,000 up to almost 115,000. So quite a bit of production these last 3 years. Advance that. What you're looking at here, these red bars are our weekly volume for the last 3 years, 17, 18, and 19. So you can see here for the first half of the year, the production is high. Then towards the end of summer, production really starts, the volume of sales starts to drop off just because we've already sold those. Click that once, Reed. And there you can see our prices. Again, as volume starts to increase there in March, we start to see prices drop. Nothing unexpected there. Go ahead and click advance one more. What you're looking at is our weekly 2020 slaughter lamb prices. You can see that sharp drop as we reacted to some of the news of the virus, and then the markets realized they overreacted and things have kind of rebounded some. So that's good news. The blue bars that you see here are actually our 2020 volume. And the good point here is that for more weeks than not, we're actually selling more volume than we did a year ago. So that's telling me that we're not maybe stacking up a lot of lambs in the country, that we are in fact bringing them to town. So 2 weeks ago, we had pretty light marketing, but this last sale, volume was up and prices were still up. But it doesn't look like we're necessarily stacking up a lot of lambs in the country. Folks appear to still be bringing them to town, with the exception of the sale a couple weeks ago. Here's my price index, and again, to date, the markets look like they're functioning much like they always do, year in and year out. So we are starting that period of time where volume increases, and that typically tends to push our prices down towards that June, July, and August period where the market's pretty well bottomed out, and then we start the climb back up. So again, this is suggesting that so far our markets are kind of behaving like we would somewhat expect them to. Again, traditional market channel indicators that we want to keep an eye on. And David has hit on all of these, but it's something that I think I'm going to reiterate. We need to keep an eye on, you know, when will our restaurants open back up? You know, the sooner the better, in all honesty. We need to keep our eyes on the cold storage and slaughter weights. And the thing to keep in mind is we need to keep an eye on some other markets across the nation, because buyers will source lambs where they're least expensive. Right now, that's not an issue, but with some of the conditions that could evolve with some of the other issues facing the lamb market, if those lambs in other parts of the country get cheap, it can't do much but bring our prices down to some extent. So there are some things to keep in mind as we move forward. I'm going to change gears here and talk about goats for just a second. Here, goats are acting just a little bit atypically. We should be still looking at some increasing prices, but so far in April, we've actually seen a little bit of a decrease below last year and just slightly below the longer term average. Again, table with all of our annual prices and volume, annual sales. And then I break it down to some quarterly numbers there for each of the last couple of years, but advance it or click it once. You can see here, the numbers really took off again in that same period, 17, 18, and 19. We were selling 25 to 35,000 goats, kid goats at the auction. And then in 17, things really jumped up. We went from 26,000 to almost 84,000. backed off a little bit to 70,000 and then jumped back up to 80,000 again. So again, if we average those 3 years, we get the next chart. And that's what the weekly volume looks like for the last 3 years, the average weekly volume. And there's what the average price has done. And again, you can see there along about mid-year, the volume picks up. Those kids that are born in the spring come to market after the midpoint of the year. Volume goes up, prices tend to drop. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Here we're looking at the purple line at the top is read off of the far right-hand side axis, and those are this year's prices. And again, you see where a couple weeks ago, the market reacted to the virus, overreacted, and then the market's actually come back and has been pretty strong. The thing that concerns me is more often than not, we are selling a whole lot less volume this year. And I'm a little bit concerned. Reed, advance it one more. Whoops, back there. We've got an awful lot of volume that's still yet to come in because I think what, 1, 2, 3, only 3 weeks this year have we sold more than the average number of kids at that week's sale. So the other weeks we're below average, and in some of those weeks well below average. I'm a little concerned that we've got quite a number of kids walking around in the country that are going to have to come to town at some time, and I'm a little concerned that we're going to overwhelm our buyers, and we'll see the prices reflected if and when that happens. Again, looking at our seasonality charts, again, typically we usually have strengthening prices through April and into May before we start to see those prices tail off. Prices have started to trend down, and we haven't even got to the large runs of kids coming up. So I'm a little concerned at what mid and late summer prices may actually do, especially if we have volume similar to what we've had the last couple of years, and it starts coming in all at once. We could have some rough prices. Just to summarize some other things, we've all heard this before. We're all kind of in this together, and what we're looking at here are some of those same milestones that Reed had showed you on his timeline, and I've just kind of illustrated some prices here for back when China reported their first death from this virus back in mid-January. Goats were trading about $285 that week. Slaughter lambs, you can just work your way across: fat cattle, feeder cattle, milk, wheat, cotton, and then the S&P 500. And then you can go down to just yesterday on the 15th, the last goat sale. Actually, we've seen a 4% increase in goats, but you look at everything else is 10, 12 to 35, 40% down. So again, there's just a little snapshot of this situation is affecting everything, not just our lamb and goat markets. And I think, Reed, that's all I've got today.
All right, thanks, Bill. Next we have Jason Banowski. Sorry, Jason, I didn't get your name added up here, but Jason comes to us from the bustling metropolis of Menard, Texas. And Jason works for Limpier, a wool buyer, and does a number of things in the fiber side of the industry, and is also, as I said before, president of the Texas Sheep and Goat Raisers. So, Jason, you got your mic turned on?
I do. Thank you, Reed. I appreciate the introduction. I'm not near as funny and as good looking as Dr. Pope, but we'll go through this. So, but I appreciate the opportunity. The situation that we're in right now in the wool industry, it's like a lot of other of our commodities. It couldn't come at a worse time, with it being right during the middle of the harvesting season for for most of us in the wool business, but I guess these things never do come at a good time. I catch myself thinking, it's just how bad the wool situation is, and then one has to step back and realize that everybody, as somebody just said a minute ago, we're all in this together. We're all in the similar situation. We're all commodities. Everybody's industries are struggling. I guess they'll say in misery needs company. Well, we all have plenty of company in this. The difference with wool that is definitely reassuring in these kind of times is wool is not a perishable item, commodity like a lot of other commodities are. So we are unique in that aspect. If we just kind of look at it, kind of talking about the numbers and in the facts of where we are right now. If you look at wool prices right now compared to last year at this time, we're about 40% lower than we were in April of 2020. If you take it even a step farther, since kind of February, since COVID-19, we're down about 20% of that 40%. So we've just the whole world, the whole textile industry is obviously taken a hard hit because of the pandemic. You look at our main customer base for raw wool, and it's China and Italy. Two of the most hardest hit places in the world. So I was kind of going back and doing some comparisons of our company's purchases, and I went back and looked at our purchases from January 1 to April of 2019, and compared to those to where we're at right now. And our purchases are down 65% from that same time period last year. If I look back at 2018 compared to 2019, we were down about 30% from 18. So you can see the impacts that the trade war and COVID-19 have had, and I'll talk a little more about those in a bit. Right now there is a very limited amount of wool selling. So it's really a struggle for us to trade on wool right now, with a country where over 70% of our business is through exports. Over 80% of our business is exports, with 70% of it being to China historically. It just equates for a real tough situation. So we have very limited sales right now. There's some types of wools that we typically trade on that it's not even about price. It's just there's no business. You just are not going to be able to sell it at any price. And of course, when we have these kind of situations, our business is unique from some other businesses that we sell a lot of wool forward. So we might take wool that's coming off now, and we'll sell it forward 4 months. So sales that we made maybe at the end of the last year for this year, there's always the fear, of customers canceling orders. So that's something that we're very concerned about as well. So talking about the reasons why the wool market is taking such a hard hit, obviously the pandemic is what we're here talking about today. And with wool being a commodity that in a lot of ways is a luxury item, it's it's different than meats where you've got to have that on your table to go from day to day. Wool is more of a luxury in a lot of instances, and it's obviously something that's going to take a hard hit in a global downturn, as far as our economy goes. So we realize the situation, and also realize that the quicker we can get through this, the better chances we have of climbing out of the slump in the wool market. The other thing is that everybody's been aware of now for 18 months or more is the trade war with China. As I said before, we typically export approximately 70% of the U.S. production to China. And anytime, and that's no different than any other country in the world. China just has emerged in the last 10 years is the textile center of the world. So when there's a blip in China, we feel it. Unfortunately, we feel it in the wool business. When the tariff was 10% that China was imposing on U.S. wools coming in, we could kind of live with that. We were still seeing that we were able to do some trading. When it went to 25%, it was just an absolute killer. So since we've been at the 25%, there's just been a very, very limited amount of wool we've been able to export to China. We are seeing on a brighter side, where China is concerned, we are seeing Chinese companies now able to apply for tariff exemption to the authorities in China with some success. So that was just beginning to happen about the time COVID-19 really took a hold. So but maybe there's going forward, I think we've seen hopefully the worst of it as far as the trade war goes. The other thing is with the lower prices is the strength of the U.S. dollar. As we all know, a strong dollar it doesn't bode well for a commodity that you're trying to export. And as we've seen through this, it just tells us that the world looks at the strength of the U.S. economy and the U.S. dollar, and the world flocks to the dollar when we see these situations. Last year, the Aussie U.S. dollar was trading about 70 cents to one. Today, it's about 60 cents to one Aussie dollar. So, the dollar continues to be weighing in heavy on the value of our U.S. clips. Kind of impacts of everything that's happened so far. Unfortunately, we're seeing wool stack up in warehouses. That never is good, for that to happen, and it's stacking up around the world as well. Again, on the flip side, wool is not perishable, so it is, we're in a good situation that it is a commodity that we can stack if we need to. Kind of some other things that that have happened as a result of all this with U.S. wools. We're getting, we're getting all of our wool tested this spring in New Zealand. Last fall, the Domestic Wool Testing Authority, Yoka McCall, decided to close doors. We had an industry collaboration, and Texas A&M stepped up to the plate and is putting in a commercial wool laboratory in San Angelo. that will be able to handle the entire U.S. clip. Unfortunately, that's not something that can just happen overnight. So in the interim, while they're doing that, we are sending our wolves to New Zealand. Well, guess what? Just like a lot of other countries, New Zealand shut down all of their operations to shelter in place for 1 month's time. On the good note, though, is we're getting word now that the New Zealand government is going to make an announcement on the 20th, which is next week, and the feeling is that they're going to be able to resume some degree of normalcy back on the 23rd, which would include businesses like our wool lab that we're sending to. South Africa shut down as well. I've talked a good bit about wool here on the mohair side. We have, 97% of the mohair production comes from Texas. 90% of that goes to South Africa for processing. I represent a company in South Africa, and that's where I buy. That's who I buy all the mohair for that I export to. Same situation. South Africa has been shut down as well. They were supposed to be shut down until the 24th of April. They have extended that now to the 1st of May, but there is some positive thoughts that they will be coming out of their suppression there as well at that time. So hopefully business is going to get back to normal there. Unfortunately, it's just shut down all mohair trading here. It's not like wool, where maybe wool is still trading but at a lower price. It's shut down the mohair trading for the time being, but that will come back. Mohair is a lot smaller commodity or an industry, and I don't think we're going to see near the hit with mohair that we are percentage wise with wool. So some people have asked, have we seen any impacts on shearing? As today, we have not. We buy wool all over the U.S. It appears that all shearing is pretty well normal. We're not seeing any major disruptions in shearing or getting, a lot of these shears out west are getting H2A workers back in. I haven't got a whole lot of reports that there's been major impacts from there. So, the hope is and thought is that we're going to be able to get the wool off the sheets back in a normal fashion and get them in. Going forward, kind of trying to sum things up here. One thing that I want to mention first is, we have a system in place through the Farm Bill that gives us protection in low wool prices, and that's the LDP, which most people know about, or the marketing assistance loans. We have that in place, but unfortunately it's not working. And why is it not working? Number one, and we wrote a letter, Texas Sheep Goat Raisers wrote a letter to Sonny Perdue last week in addressing some of our issues. And one of the things that I mentioned in there is, we have to relook at those support price levels. They were set in 2002. They were probably set on the conservative side at the time, but there's been no change to reflect higher cost of production since then. If we had higher reserve prices, we would be able to utilize that program. I would encourage anybody that can to try to put pressure in the right places to have those support prices looked at. The other big problem with the LDP right now that I see in that is we're not getting proper reporting. to be able to establish lower levels, wools have to be reported from the grower level through the warehouses, through the buyers. The problem is there's so little sales right now that we're just not seeing things get reported. So you know, encourage your warehouse, encourage anybody you can to try to keep things. If we can get prices reported that are substantiated, they have to have a certain, USDA has to have a certain amount of price reporting before they can substantiate it that will activate the LDP. So that is something that really needs to be looked at. So what's, you know, this year, the one thing I would say is, and encourage people is, you know, always in these kind of situations, the better you prepare your wool, the better quality you have, the quicker you're going to be able to sell and the better price you're going to be able to get. You know, so even though things are really tough right now, I just really encourage people to make quality in breeding their number one focus in terms of wool production. The wool market is, it can change rather quickly. You know, it's very sentiment driven. And if we see some things turn around, it can change very quickly. So, you know, wool is something that's in fashion right now. It's a cool product. It's sustainable, and it's, you know, there's a lot of new products coming out about wool. These in the last 5 years, next to skin, outdoor wear, and we, you know, I think we will see a comeback, but it could take some time. With that, Reed, that's my rundown of the wool sector.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. That was very good. It should give everybody a good idea of what we're dealing with and what might happen in the future if we prepare ourselves appropriately. So we have some time for some questions now. And if you have a question, I'd encourage you to put it in the chat box. I think you can turn on your mic if you want to ask it. The chat box tends to be the best place for that. So there was one question that came in, and I'll direct it to Dr. Anderson or Bill Thompson. Is there any information on imports? Do we know what's going on in the relative current time frame with imports coming in?
So this is David. I'll take that one, I guess. We continue to import from Australia and New Zealand. Some of the weekly data that we get, typically there is some revision. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell in the data because the way it comes in is product weight, and some conversions to carcass weight to get it on some comparable levels. We have been importing that. There's a little bit of lag in the data too. So we're back, you know, the latest stuff we have or data we have is through February. And if I remember right, without pulling up the chart, you know, for time, I left that chart out. We had imported a little less lamb in February than we did a year ago. So while we continue to import, and those levels are, I mean, we, over the course of a year, we import more than we produce ourselves, but we were importing less in total. And for a variety of reasons, in some ways, certainly as those countries deal with coronavirus, they are, you know, they put in some rules that have slowed down some shipments. Certainly their exports of mutton, of other products to China, to other countries has pulled some product off their market to go other places. Although typically we are we're a higher price market, a more attractive market for their lamb. Certainly their long-term drought has, in Australia, the drought that's cut into numbers, that's cut into their available supplies. As that cuts into some supplies, you know, we could see some effects from that going forward as well. But we're still we're certainly still importing lamb from those places, and so it's still it's an issue just as it always has been. Great question.
Follow up to that, with more lambs going into cold storage, do you think these prices will continue into next Easter market? And should producers consider purchasing LRP insurance to mitigate lower prices?
So let me tackle the first part of that first. You know, in the past, certainly if we think about 2012, some other places where we've just had huge supplies in cold storage that really weighed down the market. How we get out from under that is really kind of the important question. Last time we had some pretty large stocks, we actually moved the product. That was a year ago. It's very large stocks, and they were at big enough levels. I was pretty concerned about it, but we got the product moved out of the market just fine. We got through that one. In 2012, we didn't. We just had tons of the stuff. This time, I think the whole key is, how do we come out of this as an economy? How quickly do we rebound? How, as we get past this, as we open up, how fast do people get out there and spend? Can we jumpstart economy and get back to some growth? And what that recession looks like, I think, is the key for how we work those growing stocks off the market is key. And I think the key there is how we come out of this, how we come out of this recession. Really great question. Oh, the other part was consider purchasing LRP. Bill, you may want to weigh on this one too. I am going to say, you know, one of the problems we face going forward in this is price reporting. One of the things we have to have is mandatory price reporting of the prices that allow LRP to be offered. One of the things we've struggled with in the last few weeks is prices not being reported due to USDA's confidentiality rules. One of the things I think is critical in a volatile market like this with all of these problems is, you know, if we want to have fair and competitive markets, we got to have price reporting, and producers benefit from price reporting. And one of the things, because of how the confidentiality rule is interpreted, we actually have a lack of prices being reported. I think that would be a great idea for the Secretary of Agriculture to take the opportunity, even temporarily in this time of extreme market turmoil, to relax those rules so that we could get some prices reported, so that we're even able to offer LRP in the future, because it hinges on that price reporting. We sure need to be able to get to have prices reported for a functioning market.
Good. Bill, would you like to add?
Anytime LRP is there, that looks like an opportunity, thinking about your costs and thinking about risk management, I don't think it's a bad idea. Bill, what do you think?
No, I agree completely. You need to look at it and see if there is some opportunities to reduce some risk. David hit it right on the head. Those policies have not been available a lot more often than they have been available. So if and when you think you're ready to buy some protection, then you just have to go and see if those prices are in fact going to be available or not.
I think another important point is some people are looking to protect themselves in the shorter term versus longer term. And last time I saw it, the 13-week protection was not there. It was just the 26 and 39 week.
Yep. And again, for our what we're selling largely, those lighter weight lambs, that maybe does not necessarily fit our production system.
Bill, would you comment a bit on AMS reporting and at local auctions, and which ones are and aren't reporting?
Well, that's I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to our local AMS reporter is still going to the auction house and is still producing government market summaries. One of the other larger markets on the East Coast simply refused to go into the auction, and suddenly we're not getting any market reports from that facility just because of the virus. So I appreciate the efforts of all of those employees, but in particular ours, who's still going in and putting that valuable market information out for folks. And that kind of goes back to our question about Amarillo. What was the question? Amarillo and mule shoe auctions. I don't know enough about those auctions to say that I've seen. I can't comment on those. I just don't see enough information out of those. Have you seen anything, Reed?
No, I have not.
So,
Okay.
you know, one thing is true. We got two questions there about one about Amarillo and Muleshoe on their goat sales and some South Texas auctions. To my knowledge, if we think about look at the South Texas ones, the auctions are still occurring, but I think we've seen some significant slowing in the number of head going through. Really, with all of our auctions, trying to limit the number of people who are around the auction. Really down there, they really, everywhere really wants the buyers there, but maybe if you're selling, take the chance to not watch the sale this week. So they're really trying to maintain distance, yet still have buyers there. I think there's been a lot slower runs of animals. Secondhand, I've been told that that there are some smaller auctions that typically do run some sheep and goats through them who are not holding those sales, really in an effort to try to limit the number of people in the sale work, as it goes through. So I've heard that anecdotally, at least that maybe some of the sheep and goat sales as part of their normal routine has been canceled, but they're maintaining still the calves going through on the cattle side and cows, but at a lot slower rates than just a lot fewer head running through than we would normally see at this time of the year is what I've been hearing. I'll let somebody else try to, confirm some of that, but at least secondhand, that's what I've been told. But we do have slower runs of animals kind of all over the country, I think.
Okay. There's a question, have slaughterhouses been laying off employees? Is this a major issue for the lamb market? To my knowledge, the major packing plants have not been shut down to lay off folks. I'm not so sure on the smaller ones. I think there was one case in the U.S. of a lamb harvest facility that had some people that tested positive for it and they shut down. But it's all been kind of anecdotal, secondhand. I haven't heard any, David or Bill or anyone else.
I think we may have a bigger problem with some, further processing and whatnot, slowing down or closing due to a lack of orders through the retail market, through restaurants. And so they may be laying off people. It may not be because of having folks testing positive working there, but just plain the effects of reduced restaurant trade. How you get back up and going. Let's say we recover and we're back and going. Are those folks still out there to come back to work at the plant is a good question. How do you get those employees back? And maybe they're just hanging out waiting for the chance to come back. I don't know, but I think that's all part of the uncertainty in starting up, and certainly, but it's all coming from our retail market problems rolling back through the system.
And David, go work backwards from that though. If their orders are down, they're not going to be actively bidding on those, and that tends to reduce prices. Possibly.
Exactly why we see those lower prices in those heavyweight lambs and in other parts, because the orders for the lamb isn't there, so it moves right through our whole system.
Yep, and again, that goes back
lower
to
prices we see for live animals reflect exactly the lack of business at the retail side. Yep. I think.
Yep, and sooner or later that probably will work its way to our markets as well, I think.
I think all of our markets are related.
Yeah.
When we talk about lambs, we talk about, lightweight, that, in our non-traditional market, yet, even if we were looking at prices in non-traditional markets versus more traditional markets, prices do move together, and markets are related. And so, I don't think we're going to be, completely insulated for one, because we do operate in a national market. So, that interrelatedness, I think, is important.
As I'm sitting here thinking about this, one of the other components that we didn't really talk about in this webinar, but we did in the last one, is our ethnic holidays. And that Ramadan is coming up starting May 24th and goes on for a month. And so I think everyone's going to be keeping a close watch on how much product is moving through the non-traditional market channels. That demand is continuing from what I've heard. It's been fairly strong and steady, but with unemployment going up, it's got to have an impact on that down the road if we don't come out of this pretty soon. Any other questions before we wrap this up? I guess we can take one more. We're just over an hour. I appreciate everybody sticking with us. If not, thank you all for coming in. Thank you, David, Bill, Jason. Jason, you must have done a great job, because last time when we didn't have a wool expert on here, we had a bunch of wool questions and we didn't get any this time. So you must have covered them all.
Reed, do you want to mention that we might have another update down the road?
Oh, that's a good comment. Yeah, we're looking at doing another one of these updates in 2 weeks. That'll be Thursday, April 29th at 3 p.m. So we'll probably use the same format. We'll be sending out notifications on how to get registered for it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting it, Reed.
Have a good weekend.
See you guys.
Thank you.